So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As I was listening to Colin's talk, I thought, wow, Cardi really has a knack for putting disparate talks next to each other. But then I thought, hey, in the end, Colin and I will be talking about the same topic. Colin talked about discovering meaning from textual corpora. I'm going to talk about discovering meaning from healthcare data. So in the end, we are after the same thing. But let me explain the title first. I said, let's discover connections among 4 billion data points, starting with 2. So the first 2 data points are Cardi and me. So let me give you a brief overview of the connections that the two of us share. We share a love of hunting. When Cardi has a moment, she can tell you some stories from the recent past. We also share a love of food. I know you're wondering whether the first and the second pictures have anything to do with each other. Probably. We love gardening. We exchange seeds, plants. We've exchanged crops. And we want to establish a stronger connection in network science. We actually have a scientific connection. I just thought of it too late to put it into this animation in PowerPoint. Cardi and I have worked together on research networking systems. So we've been working on connecting people, scientists. Cardi's been part of a national project that we've also contributed to called vivoweb.org. So if you're not on there, I would actually recommend that you connect to other scientists on that platform. But let me tell you a little bit about our raw material. And before I go into what is the Indiana Network for Patient Care, let me tell you a little bit about the Reagan Street Institute. So, you know, the Reagan Street Institute is known for many things, including the fact that it is the institute with a funny name. We date back about 40 years to the idea of a person named Sam Regenstrief to improve healthcare. And probably many, if not most of you, will never have had the opportunity to hear Sam's story or know about him. So the biography of Sam is called Sam Regenstrief, The Legacy of the Dishwasher King. I found that biography after I had been invited to apply for the job that I now have. And I'm thinking about this. So I'm applying for a job in a place that has its roots in building dishwashers. So I wasn't quite sure, but it makes a lot of sense. Sam, at one point, sold 40% of all dishwashers purchased in the United States. You've never heard of his name or his company's name. His company's name was Design and Manufacturing Corporation in Connersville, Indiana. And the reason why you don't know Sam's name is because all his dishwashers were sold to Sears, and they were sold under the Sears brand. But he made a lot of money with that, and he made that money because he was a dyed-in-the-wool industrial engineer, focused on process improvement, quality improvement. For instance, one of the things he did was he built the first front-loading dishwasher. So I'm not sure whether you've ever seen a top-loading dishwashers. I have not, although my wife tells me it was the machine of choice for her mother's household. And now they don't exist anymore. And Sam refused to believe that you can build that you could not build a front-loading dishwasher where the water wouldn't come out during the dishwashing process. That's why people didn't build this. They didn't think this could be built. So he did, and lo and behold, we have front-loading dishwashers. He was also focused on, with ruthless zeal, on process improvement. So he walked around his factory and thought about waste in terms of materials, thought about waste in terms of process. And one day, he had occasion to go to a hospital Marion County General Hospital, now Eskenazi Health in Indianapolis, and the few hours that he spent in the waiting room, waiting for his physical to happen, made him realize that healthcare is broken. Where have we heard that before? So this was 40 years ago. Is healthcare still broken? I think largely it is. And he said, you know, people have to wait here all day long. The processes are so bad. There must be something we can do about this. And that's why he endowed the Reagan Institute. So fast forward to 1988, and at that time, we had built an early generation of an electronic medical record that worked across settings. So, you know, let that sink in for a moment. When you go to the doctor right now, what happens? You fill out a bunch of forms. You get a 7-minute, on average, visit with the doctor, and then you get referred to a specialist. You go to the specialist. What happens? You fill out a bunch of forms with essentially the same information that were on the first set of forms. That repeats itself at every single specialist. And we thought, why do that? You know, why not reuse the information across settings? And this is how the Indiana Network for Patient Care was born. The idea was that you could go to any hospital in what is now all across Indiana and have access to the data you generated, your healthcare encounters generated with the healthcare system. And so this has become a huge resource, and I'll tell you how huge in a second. It is uniquely valuable for observational research, and I'll tell you in what ways in a few minutes. So let me talk about scale first. We have about 13 million patients in the INPC. There are more than 25 clinicians participating, as in being the consumers and contributors to this body of data. You see there's a variety of settings in which these clinicians practice. We also go up all the way to the county and state public health departments. National labs, pharmacies, and pharmacy benefit managers contribute to that data set. In terms of numbers, the 13 million patients so far have generated almost 30 million registration events. So this is any event when they kind of get registered in a new setting. So this is why there's more events than patients. We have 4 billion discrete results, 1.7 billion clinical observations. So these are things like blood pressure, weight, your HbA1c, your LDL, your HDL. And you can see, you know, lots of data. You have 180 million text reports, and we'll talk about how those are different from your discrete observations. We log about 2.5 million emergency department visits every year, and every day 2,000 transactions get added to that database. So it's about 18 terabyte as of last count, and that is what is the INPC. So here you see this a little bit more graphical. You have the kind of producers on the left-hand side. So all these settings put data into a centralized database. So this is, some of you who may have heard about health information exchange may know that not in all places are there centralized databases. There are federated models in which data reside, where they are generated, and they are pulled together on demand. Here in Indiana, we actually have a centralized database. That's not one single database. It's actually a database for every single participant, but it's fairly easy to connect the data. And this is what we call the health information exchange. The products of the health information exchange go back out to users. So we provide, for instance, notifications about infectious diseases to the State Department of Health. We provide data to physicians in terms of population health management. Physicians access the INPC to look up data about their patients. Very important in this whole game is data stewardship. This is actually not something you see around the country. a whole lot. There are some other places in which health information exchanges work quite well. But one thing that people are always worried about is, are the data safe? And so, for instance, I'll tell you from the Boston area group of hospitals, they have constructed the health information exchange so that any hospital can actually pull out at any day. The CEO can decide, we're not going to play with the health information exchange anymore, so we're going to pull out. Nobody ever has done it there, but I'm sure it needs little imagination that if one hospital gets hacked in Boston, none will participate. So fortunately, we have not had that happen here in Indiana, and I hope it does not happen because it would severely impact the business model of health information exchanges. Here's the kind of classes of data that are shared by institutions. So you see, we capture every single visit, what the diagnoses are for hospital discharges, any lab tests, inpatient or outpatients, whether people are immunized, discharge summaries. So these are narratives that are written on when patients get discharged from inpatient settings, operative notes, surgical reports, radiology reports, and so on. We get medication data for most of our patients and tumor registry data. So it's a very complicated data set. It is very rich. And the good thing is it's highly granular. So there are a lot of discrete results in there. It doesn't consist exclusively of discrete results, but there's a lot in there. Here's a view of the data density. So the red areas are where we have most data. You can see how it's centered around Indianapolis in the middle, but we cover Indiana fairly well. But we also have patients from neighboring states. And that kind of tells you, well, patients don't respect state boundaries very well when it comes to their health care. If people from Illinois, Kentucky, Ohio coming to get care, or to actually go to hospitals there that are also contributing data to the INPC to some degree. Before we get into what you can learn from data, let me tell you a little bit about the quality of the data. So when we talk to computer scientists, it's very often, we'll just run our data mining algorithms over your data and we'll learn stuff. Well, it's not that easy. Healthcare data are noisy. They're incomplete. They're fragmented. They weren't collected for research, and that is a really important point. They were collected when you go to the doctor. The doctor doesn't think of doing research on your data. The doctor wants to make you better. And so the physicians can bridge gaps in the data. They can make assumptions that hold true based on what they've seen in practice. A research study doesn't do that. A research study wants real data for everything, high quality, highly calibrated, and so on. We have no enrollment period in this, so patients go in, out of the system. And one big challenge in the United States and many other places is, how can you tell that one record of a patient in hospital A is the same patient in hospital B? We don't have a national identifier. We have driver's license numbers, but we don't really use them in healthcare very much, at least to tie together records. So we need to use probabilistic matching to figure out, is patient A in hospital A the same as patient B in hospital B? Sometimes we get it wrong. We construct our algorithms to be rather conservative because you want to make an error on the non-matching side rather than match two people who really don't belong together. So let me give you some examples, and I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, see you here. Let me give you some examples about what we learn from the INPC data. I'm giving this to Sia because she knows way more about this. She's been way longer at the Reagan Institute than I, and so I thought I'll bring her and let the qualified person speak about that.
Can you hear me? Okay. I've been the fixture at Reagan Street for the last over 30 years, so that's why Titus brought me here. Despite all the problems that we have in the data, there have been important findings from just mining the data. The first few examples I'll go through quickly. Some may or may not come from our own institution. We have found that the Lasix in patients with chronic heart failure benefits from getting, if they adhere to their medication. Okay. And another example is whether inhaled steroids cause GI problems. Inhaled steroids, how many of you have asthma here? You use an inhaler? No? Okay. They are very effective in treating asthma. And oral steroids have already been known, well established that they cause GI problems. But less is known about whether inhaled steroids also have the same problem. And we have a lot of data this is just from one institution, from 1977 to 2002. And we had over 7,000 patients taking steroid plus albuterol compared to over 12,000 on people taking albuterol alone. And we found out that, yes, the patients on the steroid actually have more GI problems like ulcers, perforations, and bleeding. And the risk increases by 1.26 times. But if you use a spacer, if you is there a light here? Okay. Okay, this is the inhaler. Okay, you would put it in your mouth and inhale. As you push down, the aerosol will come out. But if you put a spacer in here, it distributes the aerosol throughout the spacer, and you actually put your mouth here, then it actually decreases your risk of getting any GI problems. So if you ever need an inhaler, use a spacer. And if you ever need a medical procedure, you already have heard that if you need a bypass, coronary bypass, you go to a hospital that does a lot of it. Volume counts for skills, better outcomes, but it's not actually, has not been established for a lot of high-risk procedures. One of these is called ERCP. It's a mouthful, so I won't say it out. It is when you need a diagnostic procedure, or you need diagnosis or treatment for the pancreas in the big, or in the bile duct. You need to put this floppy tube through this, thread it through, and it's really hard to do. My doctor friends tell me some of them have given up. They don't have the skills to do it. So it's a very high skilled procedure that combines the endoscopy and fluoroscopy at the same time. And we try to look for whether the doctors that do a lot of ERCPs do have better patient outcomes. And we found over 15,000 payer claims for ERCP procedures performed by 130 providers in this time period. And we had to define what a treatment failure was. And if they have to have a repeat ERCP or a correction procedure or surgery, and within 7 days of your index procedure, then we call that a failure. Now, with these data, there is no definition of what is a failure. With everything you want to study, you have to define what it is. So this is how we operationally defined it. And this is what we found. These are individual physicians. The ones with high volumes have better, have lower failure rates. All these little circles are the ones who do very few procedures, and they have high failure rates. So it's very important. If you ever need a procedure, look up how many the doctors do. Now, another one is looking for novel drug-drug interactions. I think some of you here may be working with Langley in Indianapolis. Have you heard of him? Nobody here in the audience? Are you one of the teams that works with him? Okay. So somebody down here is working with him. Actually, there is a grant from NIH that is doing data mining on the literature, looking for drug-drug interactions. When you are taking two drugs together, sometimes they cause unexpected side effects. And in this particular study, they looked for myopathy. This is a muscle disorder. If you are taking statins, some of you might have heard of people that have muscle problems. If they take the statin, like all the Lipitors and so on. And so in this particular study, they look for any pair of drugs that might cause myopathy. They started with literature mining for all the FDA-approved drugs with known CYP. This is an enzyme substrate inhibitor pair to identify potential interactions. And then they found, after they found all these pairs, they looked for those drug pairs in the INPC. Now, this is starting with all the in vitro predicted drug-drug interactions. And then they looked in the INPC to see how many of these 13,000 pairs actually get prescribed together in real life. And they narrowed it down to 3,600 pairs. And then once they have this, they went back to the literature and looked for in vitro substantiation of this possible interaction. And they found in vitro studies for 123 pairs that could potentially cause drug-drug interaction. And so for each of these 123 drug pairs, they went into the database and they looked for people who are taking this pair of drugs, and then they looked for myopathy outcomes and see which ones actually come out. And among those 123, they found that 5 drug pairs stood out. Now, 4 of these involved this loratadine. It's Claritin and Alivert. So if you are ever taking Claritin, be careful not to take too many other drugs because it's probably prone to interactions. So I'll turn this back to Titus.
Thank you, Celia. So what this little set of vignettes tells you is that it always starts with a question. And we have a large body of data to mine. The challenge that we have is figuring out the questions to ask, and then using very rigorous methodologies in which CU is an expert to actually answer the question. And sometimes you use different data sources. So in the last example, you saw literature data mining, which resulted in a huge potential universe of drug pairs. But that got pared down very rapidly when you looked at real life, because some of these drug pairs in real life don't make any sense. So you can tell that we are on the cusp of hopefully creating a learning healthcare system using the data we collect each and every day about patients. This is one of the important points I want you to remember about this talk, is that the world is not very good at using the data we already collect to learn from it. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine from Stanford investigated how many FDA recalled drugs could have been detected earlier by data mining in electronic patient records. And I'll give you the most famous example of that. So Vioxx was pulled off the market, as many of you will remember. It was pulled off the market because people taking Vioxx had a higher risk of heart attacks. And we found that through mining electronic medical record data. But there are many, many FDA drugs that got recalled based on clinicians reporting, you know, I'm prescribing drug X and Y to my patient, and, you know, they're having an adverse outcome. So Nigam Shah from Stanford went back and took, I think, 17 of those recalled drugs and looked in electronic medical record data and said, so what if we had looked for these interactions in these data? And what he found that the signal to recall those drugs on average could have been detected a year and a half before the FDA got the signal from the real world. So think about this. A lot of people didn't have to suffer adverse outcomes, or wouldn't have had to suffer adverse outcomes if we just made use of the resource we already have at hand. Let me close with a few other things about the INPC, and then we'll open it up for questions. We have converted the INPC into something called the Common Data Model, which now allows us to merge our data with data from around the country. So we are part of a very large collaboration to not just use INPC data, but data from many, many other places to learn from it. We also have a fairly sophisticated approach to natural language processing or text mining. So remember on one of the first slides, I listed 118 million text reports. That data is in free. The healthcare data buried in those reports is in free text. So it's not something you can easily query using SQL or similar. And so we use the NLP pipeline to extract findings from there. And lastly, we're also getting into geocoding. And that leads into my last slide here, which some of you in the room I know very well. And that is, how can we make connections between disparate data sets that would let us discover some new things? So we have the Polis Center here that has a lot of environmental demographic data, and we're actually working with them to think about how can we merge the INPC and the Polis data sets to learn new things. For instance, where do people live and where do they get sick the most? We know some of this already. People in lower socio-demographic strata live in not such attractive neighborhoods, some of which may be next to industrial plants and so on, and consequently, you get a different morbidity and mortality on a number of levels. So the question that I have for you is, and this is actually why I'm here, is what can we learn from our data using network analysis and advanced visualization? Kadi and I have been working on jump-starting this discussion. So we filed a collaborative research grant with IU right before Christmas. And then she invited me here to that seminar. So we, Kadi and I, see two highly capable places poised for a very productive collaboration. The question is, how can we make it happen? Who wants to be the first? What kind of questions are we going to go for initially? So thank you very much. Yes.
So it might be a simple question for other audiences, but previously in the example of the drug-drug interaction, you mentioned having patient and measure their reaction. So I'm wondering, usually in the medical experiment, how many patients do you need to make the conclusion like sound?
Will let the statistician answer that question.
Usually, numbers are not our limitation. As you see, we can usually get 10,000 of something. It's really the inherent bias in these observational data that are the most treacherous. We usually have too much power. We can detect very, very small associations, too small to be even of clinical importance.
Other questions?
Maybe I should run around.
I can speak plenty loud, I usually. I'm wondering, you were talking about defining variables, that you kind of have to assume some kind of context or look at the data in different ways, and I'm wondering if there are ways that it relates to Colin's talk in terms of, he was talking about multiple levels of was it meaning or context? Is there something about what you're doing that's similar to what he's talking about kind of philosophically in terms of how you approach data and how you make those kinds of decisions about variables and that kind of thing?
Excellent question. I've had half an hour to prepare myself for it, so I'm ready. The answer is yes. So I'll give you an example. A discrete data element in a patient record might be an ICD code of diabetes, juvenile diabetes, or diabetes mellitus. We don't know whether that's particularly true or not. So we've developed a whole set of approaches to figure out when do you call a patient a diabetic. And so you look at things like blood sugar, glucose above 100, warning sign. But that might not make a diabetic yet. You look at HbA1c. You look at whether they're on insulin. And we've actually done comparisons among these cohort definition algorithms to see how much bias is there with each one of them. Context. Are they going to a specialty clinic for diabetes? Well, that would indicate, fairly seriously that that they do have the disease. So it gives you a good example, and it matches exactly what Colin said. A lot of it depends on context. And that's only one example. Another example is natural language processing. What does MI mean? MI is it's an acronym. It could mean myocardial infarction. There's 10 other things which it can mean. But depending on which document it's in, it's actually less likely that would be MI. And those of you who are into NLP, you know that context is gold for NLP. The more you focus your context, and airlines have proved that with anyone here in the room being able to make a voice-activated change in your reservation or make a reservation. Once the context is small enough, your probability of correctly recognizing any utterance is actually getting quite large. And we're looking for the same kind of crutches when we do our NLP on our documents. Great question. Other questions? Yes?
So I was just curious about, I guess, the public implications for this. So with all these large data sets, are you being asked to give them up or to the government or so?
No. So the NSA has not rung the doorbell yet, and I hope they never will, to ask us, give us even a partial copy of the data set. So I'll talk a little bit about data curation. The data are the property of the participating hospitals. Everybody thinks Reagan Streif owns the data. We don't. We have a contract with the hospitals that we get to be stewards for the data. We get to use them for research. And our data core can make data available for research or results thereof. But there is a data management committee that actually approves or disapproves uses of data. So there are very, very strong protections on these data, including the fact that no hospital can ask us for data except their own. So people are naturally afraid of, a competitor looking at a data set and then mining that data set for desirable patients. I'm IU Health. I want to take all the patients from St. Vincent's in a particularly lucrative category. That does not happen because that's expressly forbidden with the standards that govern how we handle the data. So when we work with researchers, external or IU researchers, our data core is kind of the intermediary. We do make derived data sets available to researchers, but it's all under very strict guidelines. And not too long ago, the policy was actually made that our data sets cannot leave the premises of where they're hosted, which is going to be the intelligent infrastructure at IU. So I've had the talk with Kadi, how do we get the network science, the network visualization tools to us, and we can actually run them so that the data don't have to leave our controlled environment, which is really important. Good question. Okay, I think we are at the time.